What do you fear more, death or a life that never ends? A life where your bones regrow each day, only to be torn apart again? Where your thirst burns endlessly while water hovers just out of reach? Or perhaps a world where you're forced to relive a single action, forever, without hope of change, escape, or mercy? These aren't scenes from a nightmare. They're divine sentences, and they've haunted human imagination for thousands of years. In ancient myths, punishment wasn't just a response to wrongdoing, it was a message. The gods didn't simply enforce order. They reminded everyone who held power, who defined the rules, and what it meant to break them. Whether mortal or divine, the moment you stepped out of line, the consequences were not only brutal, they were eternal. Why such cruelty? Why not forgiveness or transformation? Why did the gods, so often revered as wise and just, choose pain that stretches beyond death itself? That's what we're going to explore in this video. The harshest punishments handed down by the gods across different mythologies, and more importantly, what they reveal about the fears, values, and questions humanity has always carried. Because maybe these stories weren't just meant to terrify. Maybe they were meant to warn us, or even to reflect us. In the ancient world, justice was not a matter of evidence or balanced argument. It was mythic, it was sacred, and above all, it was painful. When we speak of divine punishment, we have to discard the modern idea of fairness. The gods of myth did not rule with democratic ideals or compassion. Their justice was absolute, symbolic, and often terrifying. But it wasn't arbitrary. There was logic behind the torment, logic rooted in cosmic order. In Greek mythology, this order was called dike, the principle that the universe has a rightful balance. And when that balance was violated, retribution wasn't just a response, it was a necessity. The same idea appears in Norse myths, Mesopotamian stories, and Hindu epics. When divine law is broken, chaos threatens to spill into the world. To prevent that, someone must pay, and that payment must echo loud enough to restore equilibrium. But here's the twist. Most of the beings punished by the gods aren't evil. They're not monsters or villains in the traditional sense. They are rebels, tricksters, or ambitious figures. Prometheus, who loved mankind too much. Sisyphus, who tricked death. Loki, who defied the gods' plans. In many cases, their so-called crimes were acts of intelligence, love, or resistance. So why the brutality? Because in myth, it's not the motive that matters. It's the act of crossing the line. The gods demand obedience, and disobedience, no matter how noble, carries a cost. That's why punishments in mythology are so often eternal. The message must last longer than a lifetime. It must live in fear, in legend, in cultural memory. And there's something disturbingly human about that. Our own histories are filled with examples of power punishing not the wicked, but the disobedient. Myths didn't invent cruelty. They magnified it. And by doing so, they force societies to ask the hardest questions. Who deserves to be punished? Who decides? And what happens when that punishment never ends? Let's now descend into those stories, not to celebrate suffering, but to understand the forces behind it. And we begin with one of the most iconic tales of divine punishment ever told, Prometheus. Prometheus is often seen as a hero, a rebel with a cause, a god who stood with mankind. But to Zeus, he was something far worse, a traitor, a thief, and a threat to divine authority. In Greek mythology, Prometheus was a titan, one of the elder gods who sided with Zeus during the Great War against Kronos. He wasn't just a survivor, he was useful, clever, cunning, always thinking 10 steps ahead. And that's exactly what made him dangerous. Because Prometheus saw what the Olympians didn't, that humanity was weak, exposed, and alone. After the gods created mortals, they abandoned them. No fire, no tools, no language. Just fear and cold. Zeus, in particular, believed that keeping humanity primitive was a way to keep them obedient. But Prometheus disagreed. He looked at mankind and saw potential. So he stole fire, not metaphorically, literally, from the heavens. Some myths say he took it from Hephaestus's forge. Others say he lit a torch from the chariot of the sun. It doesn't matter. What matters is what fire represented. Not just warmth or survival, but progress, knowledge, defiance. And Zeus was enraged. The punishment? It had to be unforgettable. Prometheus was chained to a rock at the edge of the world, the Caucasus Mountains. And each day, an eagle, sacred to Zeus, would descend and tear out his liver. Every night, the liver would regenerate, and the cycle would begin again. Forever. Why the liver? The Greeks believed it was the seat of emotions, of courage and thought. To destroy it daily was to destroy his will, his essence. But Prometheus never screamed. He never begged. That silence? That resistance? It was part of the punishment, too. A god who wouldn't break, on display for eternity. But here's where it gets interesting. Prometheus didn't just steal fire. He also knew a secret. A prophecy that could end Zeus's reign. He kept it hidden, using it as leverage. That's the other layer of his punishment. It was political. Zeus feared him, not just hated him. In time, Prometheus was freed by Hercules, according to some versions. But the damage was done. The message was sent, challenge the gods, and you will suffer endlessly, even if you're right. And that's the power of this myth. It's not just about pain. It's about control. About how systems of power respond to disobedience, especially when it comes from someone inside the circle. Prometheus wasn't an outsider. He was family, and that made his defiance worse. So what do we take from this story? Is Prometheus a symbol of noble rebellion, or a cautionary tale about knowing your place? That depends on who you ask. But one thing's clear. Every time we light a fire, tell a story, or question authority, we're continuing his legacy. Sisyphus wasn't a warrior. He didn't slay beasts or steal fire or curse the gods. His weapon was his mind, and that, in the eyes of Olympus, was far more dangerous. King of Corinth, Sisyphus was clever, too clever. He betrayed secrets of the gods, tricked Thanatos, the god of death, and even tried to outsmart the entire underworld. In short, he broke the most sacred rule of all. He treated the gods like equals. Let's go back. According to myth, Sisyphus once witnessed Zeus abducting a nymph. In retaliation for a grudge, he revealed this to her father, a direct betrayal of divine secrecy. But that alone wasn't what sealed his fate. His greatest crime came when death came knocking, and he refused to die. When Thanatos arrived to take his soul, Sisyphus did the unthinkable. He tricked the god, bound him in chains, and for a brief moment, death stopped. No one died. Battles raged without end. Pain continued indefinitely. Even the gods were horrified. Eventually, Ares freed Thanatos, and Sisyphus was dragged down to the underworld. But the story doesn't end there. Before dying, Sisyphus had told his wife not to perform the proper funeral rites. Once in the afterlife, he used this as an excuse, complaining to Persephone that he had been dishonored. She allowed him to return to the living world to punish his wife. Of course, he never came back. He tricked death again. This wasn't cleverness anymore. It was arrogance. It was mockery. And the gods don't forget mockery. His punishment was elegant in its cruelty. Sisyphus was condemned to push a massive boulder up a hill. Each time he neared the summit, the rock would slip, roll down, and force him to begin again. Forever. There's no gore, no fire, no screaming diable, just repetition, the dull ache of hopelessness, the illusion of progress, shattered again and again. It's a punishment that speaks directly to the human condition. How many of us feel trapped in cycles? In jobs that go nowhere, in habits we can't break, in systems that reset every gain we make. That's why Sisyphus resonates, because he suffers not in body, but in spirit. He is the first mythic symbol of futility. But here's the paradox. The French philosopher Albert Camus famously reimagined the myth. He asked us to imagine Sisyphus happy, because in choosing to continue, despite the absurdity, Sisyphus reclaims a form of defiance. He keeps pushing. He refuses to give the gods the satisfaction of despair. So what began as a curse becomes a mirror, not of pain, but of perseverance, of resilience in the face of pointlessness, and maybe of freedom. Loki is a name that sparks contradiction. Trickster, companion, traitor, god. In Norse mythology, few figures are as complex or as doomed. Unlike Prometheus or Sisyphus, Loki's punishment wasn't the result of a single transgression. It was the slow, inevitable price of chaos embodied. At the beginning, Loki was accepted among the Aesir, the ruling gods of Asgard. He was even considered a blood brother to Odin. Clever, shape-shifting, charming, he often helped the gods solve problems they couldn't fix alone. He made them laugh. He challenged their pride. And for a while, he was tolerated, even welcomed. But Loki never truly belonged. His tricks became darker over time. He caused the death of Boulder, the most beloved of the gods, a death that shattered the divine order. And he refused to show remorse. Instead of regret, Loki offered mockery. At the Feast of Aegir, he insulted every god, every goddess, every virtue. It wasn't just defiance, it was a declaration of war. And so came the reckoning. After Ragnarok was foretold, an apocalypse that Loki would help unleash, the gods could no longer ignore him. They hunted him down, bound him with the entrails of his own son, laid him beneath the earth, and placed a venomous serpent above his head, dripping poison drop by drop onto his face. His wife, Sigyn, tried to ease his pain. She held a bowl to catch the venom. But when the bowl filled, she had to empty it, and in those moments the venom fell. Loki screamed so violently that the earth itself trembled. That's why the Norse believed earthquakes happened. Loki, writhing beneath the world. But again, punishment in myth isn't just revenge. It's symbolism. Loki wasn't punished for being evil. He was punished for breaking bonds. Friendship, loyalty, family, truth. He severed everything that held the divine order together. His punishment reflects that rupture, bodily, familial, cosmic. His son's entrails, his wife's suffering, his own agony. Every connection he abused became part of the prison that holds him. And yet, even this story isn't the end. Because Loki's punishment is not eternal. He is destined to break free, to return at Ragnarok, to fight and fall alongside the enemies of the gods. His pain, his wrath, his exile, they all lead somewhere. That's what makes Loki terrifying. He represents a punishment that doesn't end in submission. It ends in revenge. So ask yourself, is a punishment still a deterrent, if the one you punish becomes the very force that destroys you? Some myths are loud, filled with war cries and flaming torches. Others whisper, like a cold wind in the back of your mind. The stories of Tantalus, Ixion, and their kin belong to that second kind. These are the tales of punishments so precise, so poetic in their cruelty, that they feel tailor-made, not to hurt the body, but to humiliate the soul. Let's start with Tantalus. He was a king once, close to the gods, even invited to dine with them on Olympus. That should have been enough. But enough is rarely enough in myth. Tantalus wanted more, not wealth, not glory, but a kind of perverse intimacy with the divine. So he tested them. He killed his own son, Pelops, cooked him, and served him at a banquet for the gods. Was it madness? Arrogance? A dark joke? No one really knows. But the gods were not amused. They restored Pelops to life, and they cast Tantalus into Tartarus, the deepest abyss. There, he was placed in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree. Starving, he reached for fruit. The branch pulled back. Thirsty, he bent for water. It receded. Forever. His name lives on in our language. Tantalize. a desire you can never satisfy, a need always within reach, never met. Now Ixion, he was the first mortal guilty of kinslaying, killing his own father-in-law. The gods, oddly, forgave him. Zeus even invited him to Olympus. But once again, hospitality was met with betrayal. Ixion fell in lust with Hera, and instead of restraint, he acted, or at least he tried. Zeus, sensing his intent, created a cloud in Hera's form. Ixion embraced it. From that union came the race of centaurs. From that act came his punishment. He was bound to a burning, spinning wheel, forever turning through the void. Motion without direction, fire without rest, an image of restless guilt. And he still spins. Then there's Danaïdes, the 50 daughters who murdered their husbands on their wedding night, all but one. Their punishment? To carry water in leaky vessels, pouring endlessly into a bottomless basin. Action without purpose, labor without reward. These are not punishments of pain. They're punishments of irony, customized. The proud made low, the ambitious rendered impotent, the killers trapped in meaningless cycles. Each myth is a masterclass in symbolic justice. And what do they all have in common? A violation of trust. Tantalus betrayed divine hospitality. Ixion, sacred honor. The Danaïdes, the marriage bond. And so their punishments reflect that betrayal. Trust is the glue of ancient order. And when it's broken, the sentence is not just death. It's distortion. A life twisted into its own contradiction. But here's the haunting part. Their stories were designed to be remembered. Because every time you feel a goal slipping away, every time your work feels futile, some distant echo of their fate might be brushing against yours. So what are we really seeing? Prometheus chained for kindness. Sisyphus condemned for cleverness. Loki broken for betrayal. Tantalus punished for testing the gods. Ixion for lust. Danaïdes for disobedience. Each of these figures crossed a boundary. Some did it knowingly. Others simply couldn't help themselves. But the result was the same. They were made into eternal warnings. At first glance, these myths may seem cruel, even sadistic. But they weren't designed just to scare, they were designed to teach. Divine punishment in mythology is not about crime and consequence in the way we understand justice today. It's about order, a cosmic structure that cannot tolerate disruption. And every punishment we've seen reflects the nature of the disruption. Prometheus gave knowledge, so he was denied peace. Sisyphus mocked death, so he was denied meaning. Loki broke trust, so his bonds became literal. Each punishment is tailored, not just to hurt, but to echo, to repeat, to define an identity that cannot be erased. And yet, these stories endure not because we admire the gods who impose the punishments, but because we recognize ourselves in the ones who were punished. We all want to challenge rules we think are unfair. We all hope to escape death, even if just metaphorically. We all, in some way, try to control what we were never meant to. So perhaps the lesson isn't don't defy the gods. Maybe it's this, know the cost. These myths still live because they tap into something real, something eternal. The fear of punishment, the pain of regret, the weight of endless effort, but also the fire of rebellion, the hope of resistance, the possibility of meaning in the absurd. If you've ever pushed a boulder of your own, felt bound by expectations, or dared to steal fire from a world that told you no, maybe you're closer to myth than you think. And if that's the case, what story are you writing? Let me know in the comments which myth resonated most with you, and if you defy the gods, knowing what comes after.